The walled city of Old Town Dubrovnik features many beautiful churches, and we're going to visit a few of them. The Church of St. Blaise, also known as the Church of St. Vlaho, is a Roman Catholic church. It may be the most important church here because St. Blaise is the patron saint of Dubrovnik. He was a physician and bishop who died in the early 4th century AD. The church was built in Baroque style and completed in 1715 on the site of a former Romanesque church. That building had been damaged in the Great Earthquake of 1667 and was completely destroyed by fire in 1706. Venetian architect Marino Grappelli designed the new church based on a model of the Venetian Church of St. Mauritius. The facade is divided by 4 Corinthian columns. On top of the facade is a semicircular gable and a balustrade with 3 statues by Grappelli. A freestanding St. Blaise in the middle, and personifications of faith and hope on either side. The facade really comes alive at night when it's lit up in bright colors. The high altar is a combination of white and polychrome marble. The altar features a 15th century Gothic statue of St. Blaise in gilt silver, which looks like gold. The statue is also an historical document because his left hand holds a scale model of the city of Dubrovnik. This statue is the only one to survive the fire of 1706. Above this statue is a 17th century quintet of the Martyrdom of St. Blaise by local artist Petar Matovic. This is the incorrupt body of St. Sylvan, a Christian martyr who lived in the 4th century. It is believed in the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox religions that divine intervention allows some human bodies, especially saints, to completely or partially avoid the process of decomposition after death, known as an incorrupt body. Not a lot is known about St. Sylvan, except that he may have been a priest who was martyred in the 4th century, and that he has a large scar on his neck. There is some confusion as to which Sylvan he is, as a number of Sylvans have been canonized as saints. The Church of St. Ignatius is a Jesuit church, but it's the Jesuit stairs you take to get to the church that most people recognize. The Baroque stairs, which were built in 1738, were designed by Roman architect Pietro Passalacqua, and not surprisingly, are similar to the well-known Spanish steps in Rome. These stairs were featured in Game of Thrones during the famous Walk of Shame scene. Construction of the church started in 1699 and was completed in 1725. It opened in 1729. When I was there, it was quite dark inside, but I still managed to get some photos. The Roman Catholic Cathedral of the Assumption of the Virgin, also known as the Dubrovnik Cathedral, was built from 1671 to 1713 after the Great Earthquake of 1667 almost completely destroyed a 12th to 14th century Romanesque cathedral that was on this site. According to legend, the previous church was partially built with money contributed by King Richard the Lionheart as a gift of thanks, as he survived a shipwreck in 1192 in nearby Lokrum Island as he returned from the Third Crusade. The cathedral is built in Roman Baroque style. Stefan Gradic, a leading Dubrovnik intellectual who worked in Rome, suggested that the Republic hire famous Roman architect Andrea Buffalini. Buffalini designed the new cathedral with 3 aisles and a cupola. There were several Italian architects who worked on the cathedral, and it was finished by local architect Ile Kadasic. The treasury was property of the Republic and can only be opened if 3 different keys were used simultaneously by the Archbishop, the Cathedral Rector, and by the Secretary of the Republic. The Franciscan Friary and church belongs to the Order of the Friars Minor. Parts of the complex were rebuilt several times. The church was destroyed by the earthquake of 1667. The only original element remaining is the decorated portal overlooking the beginning of the Stradun. It was sculpted in 1498 in Gothic style by the workshop of the brothers Leonard and Petar Petrovich. The interior of the church was reconstructed in Baroque style. The 5 side altars were sculpted by the Venetian Giuseppe Sardi between 1684 and 1696. The decorations on the altar of St. Francis were painted in 1888 by the painter Celestin Medovich. The marble pulpit survived the earthquake of 1667. The main altar with the statue of the resurrected Christ between 4 twisted marble columns was created by the sculptor Cellier from Ancona in 1713. The Church of the Holy Assumption is a Serbian Orthodox church built in 1877 on the ruins of palaces of Dubrovnik nobles. It sustained damage during the siege of Dubrovnik in 1991, but was restored in 2009. It features valuable icons from the 15th and 16th centuries. The Church of the Savior, which is dedicated to Jesus Christ, is located right across from Big Onofrio Fountain. It was built in 1520 in gratitude that the city of Dubrovnik was not destroyed by a major earthquake in that year. The church was built in Renaissance style by architect Petar Andrjic of Korčula and was completed in 1528. The Old Synagogue in Dubrovnik is the oldest Sephardic synagogue still in use today in the world, and is the second oldest synagogue in Europe, behind Prague's synagogue. It is said to have been established in 1352, but gained legal status in the city in 1408. Owned by the local Jewish community, the main floor still functions as a place of worship for the high holy days and special occasions, but is now mainly a city museum, which features many Jewish centuries-old artifacts. Located on a steep, narrow alleyway, the synagogue is connected to a neighboring building which has long been owned by the Tolentino family, who have been caretakers of the synagogue for centuries. The internal layout is different from other European synagogues and has undergone numerous refurbishments throughout the centuries and has a mixture of designs from different eras. The building has sustained damage several times, with the Great Earthquake in 1667, World War II, and the Croatian War of Independence in the 1990s. The damage has been repaired as closely as possible to its original design. After the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492, many Jews from Spain and Portugal eventually settled into the independent city of Dubrovnik, where there was already a small Jewish community. Many Jews became traders and craftsmen, dealing with spices, silks, fabrics, and crafts. In 1546, Dubrovnik officials allocated a Jewish settlement within the city, with the main street being called Jewish Street in the Dubrovnik ghetto. Centuries later, Jews were still persecuted in the areas around Dubrovnik under Venetian law. When Dubrovnik's economic position and power declined in the mid-18th century, Jews were prohibited from engaging in commerce and confined to the ghetto. When Dalmatia and Dubrovnik were occupied by the forces of Napoleon I in 1808, Jews attained legal equality for the first time. However, when the Austrian Empire annexed Dalmatia in 1814, legal equality was again taken away. Jews were granted legal equality under Croatian law in the mid to late 19th century. During World War II, Croatia came under the rule of fascists. Dubrovnik was occupied first by the Italian army and then by the German army. Before the Holocaust, 250 Jews lived in Dubrovnik. Many were transferred to the island of Lopud, along with other Jews from different parts of Croatia. Then in June 1943, they were transferred to the Rob concentration camp. In October 1944, Josip Broz Tito's military entered Dubrovnik, and many Jews were transferred to the freed territories. The rest were sent by the Germans to concentration camps. After the war, many of the surviving Jews settled in Israel. Today, less than 50 Jews live in Dubrovnik. During the Croatian War of Independence in the 1990s, the city was attacked by Serbian and Montenegrin forces in what has been called the Siege of Dubrovnik. Approximately two-thirds of the old city was damaged, including the synagogue. In 1992, an artillery shell went through the roof of the synagogue, and many items had to be shipped elsewhere. Today, because of the small number of Jews in Dubrovnik, the synagogue does not have its own rabbi. On holy days, a visiting rabbi conducts services for the small community. One of the many highlights of Old Town Dubrovnik is the Franciscan Church and Monastery, which also features one of the oldest pharmacies in Europe. The earliest friary was built in the 13th century outside the walls. A new friary inside the walls and close to the Pilar Gate was built in 1317, but its construction took centuries. Parts of the complex were rebuilt several times. As we walk further down the Stradun and look back, we can see the distinctive bell tower of the Franciscan Church and Monastery. The friary was built in 1360 in late Romanesque style and contains two cloisters. The upper cloister was built in Renaissance style with arches and semicircular vaults. The lower cloister was built in Romanesque Gothic style with arches, 120 columns, 12 massive pilasters, and a promenade. The capitals on the colonnade are all different, showing various geometric, plant, human, and animal-like figures. The pharmacy dates from 1317 and is the oldest still functioning pharmacy in Europe and the third oldest in the world. The rule of the Franciscan order was to take care of the sick brethren. However, this particular pharmacy was designed and founded as a public pharmacy as well as for the needs of the monks. The establishment of the pharmacy provided a steady income to the order. This is not the actual pharmacy, which is next to the church. This is the Pharmacy Museum, which features well-preserved pharmacy furniture from the 16th century and 15th and 16th century vases from Siena and Florence. Other exhibits include various presses, mortars, a 14th century still, manuscripts of recipes, precise scales, and more. This museum also contains several liturgical artifacts. Nighttime is the right time, as the sun goes down in Old Town Dubrovnik. Once you enter the walled city from Pila Gate, you experience the merger of centuries-old history and architecture with modern-day cafes, shops, and bars. The Stradun, also known as Plaka, is a limestone paved pedestrian street, and what we see today was created after the devastating earthquake of 1667. There's plenty of people watching as you stop off at some of the cafes, bars, restaurants, and shops along the way. Perhaps the most popular area to hang out is Luza Square. It's a very, very small version of New York's Times Square. It was built in 1463 and was renovated in 1952. The 102-foot-high bell tower was originally built in 1444 by 3 local masters. However, it suffered major damage in the 1667 earthquake, was eventually demolished in 1928, and entirely rebuilt to its original design in 1929. It was damaged again in the 1979 Montenegro earthquake and restored in 1988. The colored brass face of the clock with the hand shows the phases of the moon. The bronze bell that strikes every hour was built in 1506. Next up is a very important church in Old Town Dubrovnik, the Church of St. Blaise, as St. Blaise is the patron saint of Dubrovnik. This Roman Catholic church was built in Baroque style and was completed in 1715. When it's lit up at night, the entire square comes alive. A little further down next to Rector's Palace is a statue of Marin Držić, Dubrovnik's Shakespeare, a 16th century Croatian writer who is considered to be one of the finest Renaissance playwrights and tragic comedy writers of Croatian literature. You can see the shiny spots on his nose where the bronze is worn down due to people rubbing his nose for good luck. The bronze on his lap is also worn down as people sit on his lap posing for pictures. If you walk down this street, you'll come across the Roman Catholic Cathedral of the Assumption of the Virgin, also known as Dubrovnik Cathedral. It was completed in 1713. We continue to Gundulić Square, which features a statue of Dubrovnik's most famous poet, Ivan Gundulić. The bronze statue was erected in 1892. As you can see, there are a few cafes in the square, but if you walk straight ahead to the right, you will come across a very recognizable staircase. These Jesuit Baroque stairs were built in 1738 by a Roman architect, which is why there is a resemblance to the Spanish steps in Rome. These stairs were featured in the infamous Walk of Shame scene in Game of Thrones. If you see people taking selfies here, they're either fans of Game of Thrones or they've heard of this scene in Game of Thrones. I'm in the latter category. When you go up the stairs, you see 2 important buildings. First, the Church of St. Ignatius. It's a Jesuit church that was opened in 1727. Adjacent to it is the Baroque Collegium Raguzinum, a Jesuit college that was founded in 1658 and is now a high school and seminary. Now for a change of pace, let's visit Old Port Dubrovnik. This is where you can take scenic boat rides out on the Adriatic Sea. Old Town Dubrovnik has many alleyways, and it's best to just wander around and explore them. Here you'll find many cafes, restaurants, bars, and shops. Last but certainly not least is one example of Italy's former influence on Croatia not related to art or architecture: gelato.
Come to Papa, oh baby. Good. I'm splurging with chocolate and vanilla. It's a gutsy move.
Rector's Palace used to serve as the seat of the rector or ruler of the Republic of Ragusa between the 14th and early 19th centuries. Who was the rector? The rector was an elected official and governed Dubrovnik. Rector was a formal title for a governor. He didn't have any actual power and it was an unpaid position. He had to be a nobleman, be over 50, and he only ruled for 1 month. During his 1-month term, the rector was unable to leave the building without the permission of the Senate. The palace was also the seat of the minor council on the state administration. It housed an armory, a powder magazine, a watch house, a prison, and a courtroom. Today it is the home of the Museum of Dubrovnik. We will be taking a self-guided tour of the museum shortly. Rector's palace was built in Gothic style, but it also has Renaissance and Baroque elements. Originally, it was the site of a defense building in the early Middle Ages, but over the centuries, it was destroyed by fire, earthquakes, and a gunpowder explosion. As we take the cable car up Mount Surge to get some great views of Old Town Dubrovnik, the last thing you would expect to find up here is a war museum, but here it is. When you walk around the walled city of Old Town Dubrovnik, the centuries-old history comes alive, but you will find reminders here of the devastating Homeland War that took place from 1991 to 1995. It's the recent war-torn history of Dubrovnik and Croatia that we find in this museum. The museum is called either the Homeland War Museum Dubrovnik, the Homeland War Museum, the Museum of the War of Independence, or the Museum of the Croatian War of Independence. It is located inside Fort Imperial, which was completed in 1812. The museum is basically divided into 4 sections: the fall of the Dubrovnik Republic and the history of Fort Imperial, the Serbian-Montenegrin aggression in 1991, victory days and the liberation campaigns of the Croatian army, and a record of casualties to the civilian population and damage to buildings in the Dubrovnik area. This video will give you a general idea what the museum is like. Founded in 2016, the Homeland War Museum Dubrovnik features original documents, photographs, explosives, weapons, flags, recordings, and videos that show the effect of the Homeland War in the Dubrovnik area. A permanent exhibit called Dubrovnik in the 1991 to 1995 Homeland War depicts the city's response to Serbian and Montenegrin forces in the early 1990s and the return of displaced refugees. Here is some history about what led up to the war. Croatia was part of communist Yugoslavia during World War II, and after the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe in 1989, Yugoslavia was broken up into 6 independent states: Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Macedonia. However, there was a large ethnic Serb minority in Croatia who rejected the new democratic Croatian state. The Croatian War of Independence was an armed conflict that was started when the Yugoslav army controlled by Serbia, along with Montenegrin forces, attacked Croatia. The outcome was a Croatian victory, and Croatia was able to declare their independence from Yugoslavia. Over 100,000 people died in the conflict. Dubrovnik was attacked by the Yugoslav army and Serbian and Montenegrin forces who wanted to protect their minorities and have direct access to the sea. It was called the Siege of Dubrovnik, and it started in October 1991 and ended in May 1992. Dubrovnik was bombarded by artillery, and more than 11,000 buildings were damaged, including many in Old Town Dubrovnik. Fort Imperial had a very important role in the defense of Dubrovnik, as it was the only place in the hands of the Croatian army that was surrounded by the Serbian and Montenegrin armies. The largest attack on Fort Imperial and Dubrovnik was launched on December 6, 1991. The fighting lasted all day, and the fortress suffered extensive damage, but the few defenders in the fort managed to withstand the attack. The bombardment provoked international condemnation and became a public relations disaster for Serbia and Montenegro, contributing to their diplomatic and economic isolation. Hello, I'm Andy Teach, host of Andy's Awesome Adventures, and welcome to the Red History Museum in Dubrovnik, Croatia. The museum opened in 2019, and it showcases Croatia's modern history. In fact, this is Croatia's first interactive exhibit documenting everyday life under Yugoslav communist rule. There are several rooms that tell a story. This room features a revolutionary type of kiosk that was designed to have modules easily added to or taken away. It could be used as a newsstand, flower shop, etc. The Tomos motorcycle factory manufactured mopeds and outboard engines and was one of the leading exporters of outboard engines in the world. The Yugo automobile was first made in Yugoslavia in 1980 and was introduced to the US market in 1985. The museum is divided up into three parts: socialism in theory, socialism in practice, and socialism in memory. In fact, the museum is located inside an old socialist factory. Here we learn about socialism in theory. You will learn how the Communist Party started in Croatia and how they operated during and after World War II. Croatia was part of the communist-ruled Yugoslav Federation from 1945 to 1991. Yugoslavian communism, led by Josip Broz Tito, broke away from the Soviet model and developed its own. Here we examine socialism in practice as it related to everyday life. We learn about the effect of communism on design and architecture, to music and sex education. In the 1940s, there was an economic slowdown due to Yugoslavia's conflict with the USSR. There was a decade of high growth starting in 1952 due to investments by the state. The economic miracle ran from 1953 to 1963, but the standard of living was still low. In the early 1960s, there was a need for economic growth with the goal of weakening the state's influence. Businesses were allowed greater freedom. The reforms led to higher prices and lower employment. From 1965 to 1971, 62,000 people were employed in Croatia, while 107,000 Yugoslav citizens found employment abroad. Tito achieved cult status in Yugoslavia. His photograph was in all public spaces, squares and streets, and institutions were named after him. Here we learn about the dark side of socialism in practice through the secret Yugoslav agencies that made sure everyone was, quote, happy, unquote. The Catholic Church was a threat to communist authorities, so the atheist Communist Party sought to eliminate the influence of the anti-communist church. In the post-war years, a new calendar was introduced that completely removed religious holidays. Tito died in May 1980. Although not seen here, there was also a memories tunnel or hallway dedicated to socialism and memory. There are various photos depicting memories of living under socialism, both good and bad. Both Croatia and Slovenia declared their independence from Yugoslavia in June 1991. The Croatian War for Independence, also known as the Homeland War, was fought from 1991 to 1995 between Croat forces loyal to the government of Croatia and the Serb-controlled Yugoslav People's Army and local Serb forces. The war ended with a Croatian victory.